You're listening to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. Today we'll be talking to Dr. Ernie Ortiz about change. What does it take to make big, lasting literacy change in classrooms and schools? As practitioners, we're always trying to interpret research pragmatically and put it into practice in the classroom and school communities. If you're an educator wondering how to change practices and shift mindsets, this episode is for you. And be sure to share this one with a leader who is ready to make change too. Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast. Today, we are talking about change, changing practices, shifting mindsets, moving to high quality materials. But as we know, with change comes challenge.
And we have the perfect guest to talk to us about change. And we have with us today Dr. Ernie Ortiz, who is a senior literacy engagement specialist with AIM Institute for Learning and Research. And he was a principal in the Centennial School District near Philadelphia and has over 20 years of experience in public education. And he'll talk to us today about his leadership in schools, how he led some change with science of reading in those schools, and how teachers changed their practice and how students changed, how it changed how students were educated across the whole district. So we cannot wait to talk to him today. So welcome.
Yeah. Welcome, Ernie.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Lori, for having me. Really excited to be here and have this conversation with the two of you.
Yeah, I think this is such a great way to enter this season of 2023. You've had quite a journey, both as a teacher and as a leader. So could you start off by sharing a bit about your science of reading journey? I feel like it's so specific to each one of us, and we'd love to hear yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you, Lori, for asking. And it all started back in 2018 with the work that Emily Hanford was doing. And when I saw that she was putting out some information regarding a school district very near and dear to my heart, the Bethlehem Area School District, where I graduated from and is relatively close to. Yep. So it's relatively close to where I live still, about an hour and maybe an hour and 10 minutes north from where I live. And so when you see something like that, a successful, a school district as successful as Bethlehem has been near you, you're kind of like, what are they doing differently potentially that we aren't? And so once you start to really dive deep, your eyes begin to open up. And so for me personally, before I started having these levels of conversations with my teachers and then my colleagues in the district at the elementary level and then at the district level, I felt I needed to be more educated so that I could be a person who can have engaged conversations. So my journey started back in 2018 and really coincided with my time where I was beginning my doctoral work. So for me, it made a lot of logical sense that if I was going to focus and dedicate so much time on a dissertation, it should be something that will help me professionally. So my learning with the science of reading have helped benefit me with my research for my dissertation. And with that, over the next several years, 4 years, it helped me to be more educated, more involved, and have a voice not only in my school, but in my district, quite honestly, in my state. And in situations like this, some might even say my voice has gone more national. Not that I'm trying to be this
you can say Ernie, worldwide. We have lots of listeners in Australia and New Zealand, so say hello to all of them who want to learn about change and reading science.
Right. And so, I say that because it's something that for me as an educational leader, I always took that really seriously, to be the instructional leader of my building, and especially of an elementary building where at the very least the children are going to leave my building learning how to read.
Yeah.
So that my middle school colleagues would understand that the product that Ernie School's putting out. It's a good product, if you will. And so I really took it upon myself to be that person, that instructional leader that would really help facilitate that level of change in practice and ultimately impact or maximize student achievement.
Oh my gosh, that's so important. And I think so many leaders can resonate with that, right? Like they just take so much responsibility for both the teachers and students that they have under their care. So that just really resonates with me. And we know that leaders play such a critical role. And what struck me about what you said is the active engagement, right? You were like, I need to dive deep. That's really important. That to me, when I was a teacher, always felt like the leaders who cared the most were like your elbow partners, right? So they were diving deep with you. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about what it takes to disrupt the way, quote, it's always been done.
Well, in terms of disrupting the status quo, being a change agent, if you will.
Yeah.
You have to understand your context. Every context is different. Your local context, my school within the district, your region, your local region, depending on the role that you're in, because you could be in a role that impacts a county. And so not just a district. And I'm learning in my current role with AIM, every place is different. Every state handles education differently. And so there's a lot of nuance across the country for something that is extremely important. And that speaks to local control, and that's great. So with that understanding, what is your role in the terms of change and disrupting the status quo? So as a building principal, I knew that the rapport that I had with my teachers was going to be critical and my ability to impact change at all level that was going to become more organic instead of top down, if that makes sense. Anything top down is going to be minimized in its success compared to something that's organic. And I could honestly speak to, although I'm no longer the principal of McDonald Elementary School where I was for the last 5 years, the change is absolutely organic and is continuing to evolve and grow. It's not something where you ever reach the finish line, or what we like to say at AIM, you're never cooked. You're always improving, you're always evolving, you're always refining. And so with that, understanding that you don't want to place any blame or shame, you want to honor the room. We honored the work that the teachers were doing, have done, highlighting the good that's happening, the glows, if you will, while also looking forward with, okay, this is where we've been, this is where we are. Here's the vision of the future that's going to be different than the past. And how is that going to be different? And then you have to, as a leader, and as leaders, we've done this, identify what are going to be those short and medium and long-term goals. Because the long-term goals are so far away at times, you don't want to simply focus on those goals because then you might feel like you never get there. But you have these short and medium-term goals where you can celebrate the victories along the way, which then become the motivating factors. And so with that, there's a level of planning and also understanding that although I was in a more formal leadership role, there are countless teachers in my building who are the informal leaders who absolutely help with the messaging and help support the wave of change that came in our literacy landscape at the building and in our district, and I would argue even in our county. So they were absolutely instrumental in creating this organic culture now that is infused in the school and in the district that has really solidified the change.
Yeah. I think Melissa's going to ask you the next question, but I do want to say really fast, that just reminds me so much of Dr. Sonia Santelises in Baltimore. One of the things I always remember that she would say to us is lead from your seat. And I just think that's so powerful. Sometimes as teachers, we feel like, oh, what can I do? There's so much that's out of my control, but it really is so powerful to lead from your own space. And that does change your mindset and how you enter your classroom, your school, your district every single day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to ask you about this side-by-side approach because, I think we can all say we probably experienced maybe both, but we definitely experienced that top-down where, your principal gets an idea or the superintendent gets an idea. They read a book, they heard a podcast, something, right? And they're like, this is what we're all doing now. And they all just say, this is what we're doing now. I'm wondering, could you like actually give some examples, Ernie, of what that side-by-side approach looked like in your, when you were learning about the science of reading and making those changes? What did it actually, like, what did you learn about? How did you learn about it? How did you share it with teachers? Like what actually happened?
That's a great question, Melissa. And so when you learn something new, one thing I wanted to avoid was being a victim of reading something on Saturday morning and then coming in on Monday saying, all right, hey, everyone, this is what we're doing.
This is the new thing.
Yeah.
And they're all like, oh no, he read a new thing.
You read Shanahan's post on Saturday and now it's coming in on Monday, coming in hot.
So you want to avoid that because quite honestly, that's not going to lead to sustainability, success, and it could cause a level of frustration amongst the teacher ranks. And so that's why I took a lot of time to really educate myself, because whenever change comes, there's always going to be questions. It doesn't matter what kind of change it is, there will be questions. And I wanted to be as informed as possible for the questions that came. And so a lot of those questions come from the people who want to be as stellar in their profession as possible. Because I am of the belief that teachers have the best interests of children in mind, and they want to be the best at their craft. And so when they have some level of concern with how successful they can be, that raises their angst. And it's our role as leaders to reduce that level of angst. I say reduce because quite honestly, can we ever eliminate it? I'm not sure. But I say reduce that level of angst so that when we're that side-by-side partner, it's a matter of, I understand that this is going to be possibly different than the way we've done it. Here's how it's going to be different. Here's how we're going to go about approaching it. And there's time. And I have an understanding with you that we're going to make mistakes along the way. I'm going to make mistakes in the role of leadership with this level of support and implementation. Perhaps there might be some bumps in the road with regards to the instruction, but it's not an I gotcha. It is how can we help support and refine this so that ultimately the children improve with their reading ability. And you can translate that to really anything that we're doing, math, science, social studies, writing. Here we're focusing on reading, and quite honestly, then embrace and encapsulated all things literacy, because then you throw writing in there and whatnot. So, and spelling, which goes hand in hand with reading, but the focus was reading at first. And I will say that. And then it's like, as you learn more, then you're like, oh, I see how these other components of literacy really intertwine each other, and how I can glean information for reading from something that maybe isn't specifically reading. And so with all that being said, the leaders who were really my early adopters, who would ask the questions, who wanted to learn more, who were intrigued, and were the risk takers, those early adopters that were willing to have me in their classroom. And I say have me because it's a matter of, you don't want to create a sense of like, here's my boss, here's my principal coming in, and I need to make sure that they think I'm this stellar educator. You want to avoid that. You want to create something that's going to be as safe and as welcoming of an environment, not just for the children, but for the adults as well, so that there can be some level of risk-taking, vulnerability, and knowing that it's not going to be held against you in an I got you kind of format. And that ongoing dialogue that we had for 4 years. It was not just 4 weeks, 4 months, it was 4 years as we continue to refine first our instruction. That was the biggest thing. How are we going to go about refining our instruction? Because that's something that we can tweak almost immediately once we have these conversations. And then what we ended up seeing, Melissa and Lori, is that we had to start having conversations about curricular resources. Then we had to start having conversations about assessment. And then how those two pieces impacted the systems that we had in place, like MTSS. And so with all of that, that's why this was a journey that was 4 years in the making. They're in year 5. It's still going. It's not going to stop. There's always refinement and improvement to really enhance, ultimately, again, student achievement.
Well, I love that you said that it's not, you can't just change one little thing and expect, miracle to happen, right? I love that you all went on that journey of what else needs to change. Now that we changed this, now we're seeing this needs to change. I love that you looked at the whole system and not just one aspect.
Yeah.
And the teachers would bring that to my attention.
Right.
And that's what was awesome. And they would say, oh, the instructional piece, I completely understand. the phonemic awareness and the phonics and leveraging those two instructional practices and that time that we have even more effectively. But the assessment piece, I have a question about that. And those conversations we would have, and there were times I would say, you're right. We need to consider this and we need to look into this further. And I was fortunate enough to be able to then bring those topics up to our central leadership, director of teaching and learning, the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. And they were very receptive to the feedback. And then, so that partnership that extends from beyond the building, because there's only so much you can control from your seat, from the teacher level, from the building principal level, then you have to have that level of support at the central or district level. And so with that, I was fortunate enough, we were fortunate enough, and ultimately the students were as well, because this impacts them with more than anything else, that we were able to coalesce as a team to really brainstorm and come up with a pathway to really help support us with instruction, curriculum, assessment, and the systems that really support all those three.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could, do you have any examples you could share? Like, I think you might have mentioned in our pre-call, like a coaching cycle. Could you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah. So once, we identified, there was professional development that was needed. And it's no secret. You mentioned I work for the AIM Institute. And at the time, the AIM Institute, we partnered with them back in 2018, 2019 school year. And that level of professional development was extremely helpful for us with understanding the science of reading and then understanding how the research and literature translated the practice. And that was just the baseline. And then from that, they had other resources that helped us grow with writing and structured literacy and how, I always had this, I say misconception that the science of reading and structured literacy were one and the same because I would use those terms interchangeably. And now I see that that is not the case. But back then, that's what I thought. And so with that, we didn't have coaches at that time in the school or in the district. But then over the time, we had coaches that were hired because we saw the need. With implementation, we had this professional development, which was great. And we had the coaching that coincided with the PD, but we didn't have the job embedded professional development. And that's where the coaching came in. And as a building principal, try as I may to be a partner with my teachers in instruction, at times, they only sometimes ever saw me as their supervisor or as their boss. And that's always going to complicate that coaching, that coach-teacher relationship. So we hired coaches as a district, and the coaches were instrumental in helping identify areas that were of need in K1 and 2, 3, and 4, 5, when we were implementing new curricular resources or being more diagnostic and prescriptive with our data. How did we go about using that to really enhance and refine our practice? And so without this level of reporting back to me, this is what I saw, you need to kind of check this out, Ernie, because it's not going well. No, it was not. There's this level of confidentiality, of support with the coaches and the teachers that in my mind helped me and my building be very effective in pushing it forward so that the instructional practices that we were hoping to see were happening. And I can tell you that when I came to visit in a more formal way, like a walkthrough, it was easy for me to say, yep, I'm seeing this. And the conversations I would have as follow-up with that, Lori, I really appreciated the visit I had today. It was so great to see that you were infusing letters as soon as you're introducing them in phonemic awareness. Well, that was because of my coaching cycle with my coach with regards to really refining phonemic awareness instruction in my classroom. Wonderful. And then to have those kind of conversations and then communicating that to the school board, which ultimately decides, human resources with how's that going to be allocated? Because literacy leadership isn't just about instruction. It's big, but how do we use our talent? How do we use our time? How do we use our funding? Funding being a big role with regards to staffing. And so with all that being said, the coaches were huge, instrumental. K-5, now it's K-12. So we have 4 coaches, and I still say we, even though I'm no longer there, I still say we. But when I transitioned out, there were 4 coaches to help support this movement that is now K-12. It's gone past K-5, although it might have started in the elementary realm. The need is absolutely a K-12 need.
I want to take us on a little tangent. I hope you don't mind, Lori. But I know that some of our listeners probably got stuck when you said the science of reading is not the same as structured literacy, and probably missed everything you just said because they were like, wait a second. I did think those two things were the same. Would you mind digging into that a little bit, Ernie, and actually talking about what you learned is the difference?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I would often use those two terms interchangeably, and it's my understanding that they are separate. They're not, although they might seem similar, they are absolutely, in my opinion, I see them as separate now. And what is termed as the science of reading is this large body of research and literature that shows how reading develops, the aspects of the brain, and how the brain develops with regards to its transition with rewiring the neural pathways, and all of this that's included with understanding how reading develops. And structured literacy is the instructional practice because of that understanding of the research and literature. So if you're understanding the science of reading and how this knowledge base, this evidence shows or suggests how effective, how people, children, and not just children, but people learn how to read, structured literacy encapsulates how we go about providing that effective instruction to maximize reading achievement and reading development. And so that's how I see it. And from my time when I learned it back in 2018 to today, that's how I communicate that, so that there's an understanding that those two are nuanced, those two terms.
I think we could keep talking about that for a moment. Do you mind if I like keep on the tangent? So I'll pose a question to you both. Within structured literacy, do you include something like knowledge building, or is that parsed out as a separate piece?
So when you say knowledge building, is it for the professional or the?
I was thinking the student.
The student. Okay. So yeah, I would probably, knowledge building in terms of background knowledge, or
for example, we like the text sets that would build knowledge on a topic that would bring students what they need in order to be able to read and write, like build their vocabulary knowledge, be able to understand complex sentences about a topic, like, right, such as space, right? And then they would have enough knowledge to be able to have a writing output. Whereas now I think sometimes we get stopped up at like, let's just build some background knowledge and then jump into the text. But actually the text should be doing the work of that, so I have this internal struggle. I don't know the answer to the question I just asked. I'm just throwing it out there with two of my literacy friends here while we have a microphone.
This is what I would say if one of my teachers were to ask me that question. And I always preface these kind of responses when I'm having these conversations as I'm still learning alongside of you. Yeah. So this is what I see it as right now. When we are working, for example, with background knowledge, and we're looking to activate background knowledge, like you said, Lori, and sometimes we activate it and then we move on. But, building that background knowledge, connecting that background knowledge, and how it's like compound interest. The more background knowledge we have on a specific topic, and how we engage in that specific topic, whether it's a text, a particular text set, articles, a blog post that the children might be, something from Newsella that they can engage in. That to me is an approach to addressing background knowledge. So I would say that, that fits within the structured literacy realm, in my opinion. Now, maybe there are going to be some people who are listening to this and maybe disagreeing with, and maybe others are like, yeah, I agree with you. But that's the way I see it. And that's how that conversation would happen with my teachers. And we would get to a point where we're not going to get too hung up on it, and perseverate on it, because quite honestly, it's good to have these conversations and learn. One thing that we absolutely had a lot of conversations on, at least in my level, were phonemic awareness and phonics, and where was the uses of letters in between that, and knowing that. Yeah. Okay. So you asked that question about background knowledge. That was absolutely something in my building where we would have a lot of conversation, particularly with my K-1 classroom teachers, because, we were reading the research or reading the literature and then following what some of the national conversation was. And as we're looking to maximize our precious minutes in the classroom, which are 120 minutes every single day for the English language arts block, which includes reading and writing, because some people will say, we only have 90 minutes for reading, but that included for us the 30 minutes of writing that was infused in the 120 minutes. We wanted to maximize, even if it might have been just 5 to 10 minutes a day of the phonemic awareness and phonics overlap with regards to how do we infuse letters so that we're connecting the sound to letters as immediately as possible, as appropriately as possible. And those conversations kind of reminded me of that question with you asked, does background knowledge fit into that structured literacy bucket, if you will? Well,
yeah.
There's so many conversations that are similar to that. And as long as we as educators are continuing to be curious, seek those answers so that we can improve our craft without being too rigid and too closed-minded to be open to other possibilities, that's what helps us remain healthy in our craft and as educators.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point we're all still learning, right? Like Lori said, even I don't know the answer to this question, right? I'm posing it to you all. What I think is interesting about that question, Lori, is that I think we can all agree that the knowledge, vocabulary, phonics, phonemic, all of that is based on, the science of reading would say that all of that is important.
Yeah.
The structured literacy, I think what makes it easier to put the phonemic awareness and phonics in that structured literacy bucket is that there's a finite number of letters and sounds, right? So I only need to know this many letters, this many letter sounds. And so therefore I can structure that very easily. It's a lot more difficult to structure the knowledge and vocabulary, which is, infinite. And we don't, it can really
it's so
be
complex.
Anything.
It's so much more complicated.
Not to say it shouldn't be a part of it. It's just harder to put it into a structure.
Yeah, I think that's why when I'm on social, I see structured literacy often interpreted as phonics and phonemic awareness.
Right, because you have 26 letters, 44 sounds, clear. And we got to make sure they know those.
Right.
Yeah, so I think there are key components that are really important. Like we know that knowledge has a really important role in comprehension.
Yeah.
But it's much harder to explain in like a 10-second Instagram reel than it is to talk about phonemic awareness for a hot second on, and not that one is easier than the other. I'm just saying like one is more complex than the other.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think like going back to that idea of change, that's where that question came from. Like I really, really, really want to take 2023 to think about the change and shift of like, how can we think about quote structured literacy as that body of not as that body of research, but as different as that body of research, but using that body of research to help us inform that. And what does that really look like? So you're making me think a whole lot today, Ernie. So thank you.
Yeah. And there's baby steps to change, right? So when we started our change process, we were looking at those foundational skills. And that's because we really wanted to help support the success in our 3, 4, 5 bands, because, nationally it's no secret. That's where a lot of state assessment starts to happen. And however we feel about state assessments, good, bad, or indifferent, they're a metric that are often used and referenced. But we felt that if we were going to address 3, 4, 5, we had to start in K1, 2. We had to. And I can tell you, my son, who our third child, he's still at the school where I was the building principal. I was his building principal since he was in kindergarten.
Aww,
so he was really, he's in 5th grade. He's in his last year of his elementary years. And I'm very still close to a lot of the teachers. His teacher and I, we talk often enough. And she has explained to me that she has seen an evolution with regards to students' ability to effectively decode. And she's a 5th grade teacher. And she sees a strength overall that has started to come up in the pipeline and is really peaking this year, and which then allows her to do more of those upper strand. If you think of Scarborough's reading rope, focusing on those upper strands without the need to have to remediate some of those lower strands, which can impede the success of students with making those connections which will help them comprehend. So, we see that that's a victory. And I would share that level of a quote or feedback to the staff as to K1, 2 teachers in grade level meetings, because the impact is being seen, maybe not in the assessments, but it's being seen anecdotally. And overall, then we can continue to refine and then maximize our time while looking at those upper strands and refining our approach to comprehension, if you will. Vocabulary. I know vocabulary instruction was a really big emphasis for me during my last 2 years, because I felt like that was the next step in our evolution to really maximizing our instructional time and getting the biggest maximization of student achievement.
I keep thinking about, as a teacher, if I wanted to advocate for change and I wanted to approach the leader in my building, or I wanted to approach other teachers, it feels like such a tricky conversation. And I'm wondering if you have any advice or any thoughts on how a conversation like this might be able to support like elevating a school. I mean, I know our focus is students always, but sometimes I think the adults get in the way of each other. So curious for your thoughts.
Yeah. And I've been asked that question a number of times over the years. How do I approach my building principal, or how do I approach the supervisor of curriculum instruction to really start this conversation? And you have to know your context. You have to know the decision makers in your school or in your district. And it's always a good idea to approach it in a way that's going to be positive and not come across as we're doing something wrong. We need to fix it. And for me, when I saw, for example, the Bethel Area School District and that information, it's like, oh, here's this school being highlighted. I want to learn more about what they're doing. And then comparing that to what we were doing. Okay, there's certain aspects that we were doing and that were kind of the same, similar. So maybe highlight that when you approach, start with the positive and then build off of that to improve, to maximize this positive that we are doing. Here's something to consider and come with some suggestions. I always appreciated when one of my teachers would come to me with a suggestion. Here's a concern, or here's something that maybe you should be aware of, or maybe we should be aware of. Here's a possible consideration or solution to this concern, if it was a concern, which, as a building principal, all concerns come to you. But I always found it really positive and appreciated when it wasn't just a concern and then, okay, you figure it out. It was concern and, hey, here's some, as I was thinking about this, Ernie, here's something that maybe we can do. Oh, that's great. And I really appreciate that, because as a building principal, we are tasked with being the instructional leader, but we also manage a building, and there's a lot to that. And sometimes that could be so much that it takes away from our instructional leadership. So it's all about the approach, in my opinion. It's about the approach. Come with a positive mindset and come with some level of information, whether it be data, whether it be a podcast, whether it be an article, something that's going to be easily digestible. Don't come with research that's going to be dry and boring, because I can tell you it's probably not going to be read. Not everyone enjoys reading research. I did it during my dissertation, but that's because I had to.
Yeah.
I do it now because that's part of my role, and I appreciate that. But most people, let's be real, the research in its kind of more academic form can be dry unless you're absolutely into that topic. And so how can we present information in a way that's going to be engaging, a couple pages or a video? I've always appreciated videos. And prior to this call, we were talking about podcasts and getting through certain podcasts. And that's always a great thing. So sharing something that could be a conversation starter, or highlighting, it was really important for us to see someone locally doing something well, because now our state has legislation that's kind of supporting this movement even more. So when you have a mentor school or mentor district nearby, absolutely easy to reach out and ask those types of questions and engage in dialogue that is going to be like collegial in nature, and maybe you bring it back that level of information and have internal conversations. That would be my recommendation. And quite honestly, I don't want to say be the squeaky wheel, but don't give up if at first you don't succeed. Try and try again, but at an appropriate, don't overwhelm, but come back in 3 to 4 weeks and follow up and continue to be someone who's going to maintain that level of persistence, because sometimes we're just so busy as leaders that we're going to get to something, but it won't be right away. And sometimes a gentle reminder is very helpful. Yeah. That would be my recommendation.
That's a really good point.
It is. Patience.
Yes.
Yep.
Ernie,
Yep.
I remember on our pre-call you mentioned that you used to just like call some of these researchers and talk to them, which I just think that's so fabulous because, I mean, I'm thinking of school leaders who I know who, they were high school science teachers and they become a principal of an elementary school and now, are in charge of the instruction of teaching students how to read, but that wasn't necessarily what they learned when they were becoming a teacher. So do you have stories to share or tips for people to learn about the science of reading in interesting ways, not just reading all the research?
Yeah, so social media was very huge for me, and particularly Twitter. And so I've made numerous friends and formed bonds through Twitter that will last my professional and probably my personal career and lifetime. And so with that, when you see things like I remember reading an article in the Reading League Journal, and Dr. Susan Brady was discussing phonological sensitivity and phonemic awareness. And it was in contradiction kind of to what we were doing in the classroom at McDonald. And I was like, I raised my eyebrow. I was like, okay, I'm always looking to maximize our 120 minutes. So I reached out to someone who had a connection to Dr. Susan Brady, and she was so kind she was so kind to connect the two of us together. And I was able to have a conversation with Dr. Susan Brady about this. And I remember another person who was speaking about phonemic awareness with and without letters. And I reached out to that researcher after their article was posted, and we had a great meeting. And they shared, this article isn't meant to cast blame or shame. It's meant for practitioners like yourself, Ernie. This is what he was telling me, to have a reflection of what you're doing in your school and then looking to refine and enhance it. That's all. And I really appreciated that because as a practitioner, we're in the trenches, and I believe all practitioners want to do as good a job as possible to help support the children. And so having social media to be able to connect with researchers, and I remember meeting Dr. Mark Seidenberg at the AIM Symposium, research symposium several years ago. I was still a building principal at the time, and he was asking me questions about our resources and our curriculum, and I was just like, "You're asking me?" And he's like, "Yeah, you are in it." Like, he's like, "I'm just a researcher. You're living it," and I find it so interesting, your perspective, and that really kind of turned the light bulb on for me because he's right. Like, we as practitioners, we belong we should have a seat at the table in this type of conversation because we're living it every day. I really appreciated that, and knowing that he was kind of the initial person who gave me the sense that they're willing to have conversations with us, even if it's in person, through email, through Zoom. And so with that, being able to just reach out to them and know that they're more than willing to connect and just kind of provide that level of extra feedback based off of whatever article or podcast that you read or listened to is really, really awesome. And knowing that, and it takes a phone call or an email away.
Yeah. It makes me think, Melissa, about how, I know this is Natalie's a journalist, but it makes me think about one of our first episodes. Ernie, I'll tell you the story since you probably don't know it. We did the same thing as you. We were reading Natalie Wexler's articles. We were like, oh my gosh, this would be so cool to have a conversation with her. We'd love to learn more and hear more and just talk about it. And we were like, what the heck? Let's just email her. Let's just see. We'll email her. We'll see if she responds. And when she responded, it was such a boost of confidence. We thought, well, heck, let's go email some others. And we started just reaching out. And I mean, researchers and journalists, they want to talk about their work. And very often too, they want to share it with you, not behind that paywall. So like anyone listening, if you're like, oh, I saw this thing and I really want to read it, I mean, just reach out. They will very likely send it to you. And that I think struck us as like, wow, everybody is really in this learning together.
Yeah. And I think what's so important about your meeting with Mark Seidenberg is back to our conversation about science of reading versus structured literacy. I think people hear often that idea that the science of reading is like there's so much research and it's kind of like set in stone. Like we know how it happens. And I think that's true. We do know how the brain learns how to read, but I think there's still so many questions about what does that mean for school? What it looks like in a school? What does that mean for implementation, for instruction?
Yeah.
How do you actually make it happen? There's still a lot of research to be done there, and a lot of questions about what it looks like. And teachers really are the people doing it and making it happen.
And that's where, I appreciate the role that I'm in now, because I can serve as that thought partner, having had the experience that I've had when I work with schools, districts, educational service centers across the country who have these level of questions and thoughts. Implementation isn't just, you're tweaking instruction, because it's part of that, but you're impacting understanding as a professional, then you're impacting your practice, but then decision making with regards to curriculum cycles, decision making with regards to how we're going to leverage our precious professional development time, how are we going to spend funding, how are we going to communicate this out to parents, what does this mean for report cards, what does this mean for us as professionals when I'm sitting across from a table with the parent and I'm communicating the implications of the report card. All of these things are what I lived as we went through the change, because we had to change our report card. We had to communicate the new assessments and what did the assessments mean, because these assessment results were going home, and some of the parents are like, I don't know what all this green, yellow, red means, and can you help me? So there's this level of, and so our assessment calendar evolved, where it only had the assessments and the dates. When we first started, it had then when the information was going home to parents, it had when we were going to analyze the data, because all of that had to be included in the assessment calendar. So that level of implementation, you're right, Melissa, I believe you mentioned it. Implementation is still evolving, that implementation science. Sometimes it just seems like common sense to me, though. It's like, okay, what are you going to do? We need to communicate this to parents so that they aren't blindsided when we come into conferences and we have this level of concern. That level of information needs to go home, and they should be able to easily understand it. And we as the professionals have to be able to speak to it. And that's something that involved coaching, but also strategic planning. And it evolved. And I know our assessment calendar was an example of that evolution, how it went from simply having the dates of when the assessments were going to be given to more of when is information going to go home, when are we going to have data meetings to follow up and support that. All of that is what really helped evolve our assessment calendar. And that's an example of supporting implementation and an evolution of becoming more of a literacy and math really mindset with regards to using that data to be diagnostic and prescriptive.
Yeah. Can I back us up and just ask a question about this idea of change and implementation? Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about lots of different personalities of educators as you're standing there, Ernie, and you're like, hey, y'all, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to change the way it's always been done. Here's what I'm thinking about. And then you roll out your plan, right? I'm thinking I'm a teacher who might be completely skeptical. I'm like, I'm not 100% with this guy. And then you might have teachers who are like, yeah, I'm going to jump on. I'm here for it. I'm into it. Mm-hmm. You might have someone in the middle. Like what happens and how do you eventually get everyone on board? And maybe that's an impossible question to answer.
Yeah. I don't think it's impossible. I think what was my experience is I didn't go in saying, all right, from this point forward, this is what we're doing. It was not that top down. How I approached it was, here's what we need to start considering. Start considering sound walls versus word walls. Here's why. And so again, I planted the seed, and then those teachers who are like diving in head first, those early adopters, they're like, tell me more. And it was things like sound walls or understanding. I remember speaking about the simple view of reading and introducing that term for the first time to my faculty and them having the same reaction that I had when I first heard the term. What is the simple view of reading? What is that? What is Scarborough's reading room?
Yeah.
Okay. Why are you telling us about sight words? And what do you mean they're different than high frequency words and irregular words? No, it's the same thing. What do you mean we shouldn't be doing memorizing of sight words? A common practice that we have been doing, at least my entire career. I did that as a teacher, and I absolutely was supporting and doing that as a building leader for the first part of my 8 years as a principal. And so with that, you start laying the seed of these are points of instructional practice that we need to reconsider. And so the people who were going to dive in first came to me naturally and were like, I want to learn more. What do you mean? I do sight words. Are you saying we shouldn't be doing sight words? And those conversations were very organic. Those 10 people, I remember it like it was yesterday, were my early adopters. And they covered primary, intermediate, special ed, ESL. They came from all the different aspects that you can think of in a school. And so with that, they helped with the messaging. Again, informal leaders, lead from your seat. And so as we continued to have more momentum, the early majority started to come on board. So then they were like, okay. And then they had an outlet. If they didn't feel comfortable coming to me and showing some level of vulnerability because they had questions, they had a colleague they can reach out to who was someone that could be that cheerleader, if you will. Yes. Yeah, this is absolutely effective. And here's how I've seen it change my practice and support student achievement in my classroom. Oh, okay. Tell me more. What is that? And so that's where it became very organic. And then as a district, we make plans to provide this level of knowledge and professional development as a baseline. And then what are the pathways for further improvement, which is something that has, here are your options. Here's your mandatory training. Here are your options. And that's where it became really organic and a culture shift in the school and in the district. It wasn't like, this is what we're doing moving forward. I was a little strategic with how I was going to start planting seeds, who was going to be someone who was going to be really into this, early kind of adopter type of approach with embracing it. And then they were like, if you're familiar with Cotter's change theory, they were my early coalition who helped really move the needle forward.
Didn't you bring up iPhones when we talked about this on the pre-call?
Oh, yes.
I literally just wrote down in my notebook iPhone, and then I asked you that question.
The early adopters for iPhones.
Yeah. So the metaphor I like to use, and my teachers will tease me about it, the early adopters were, if you remember back in the day when we would have to wait for some of the new tech to come out, and there were lines for the new iPhones, right? So the early adopters were the people who would wait in line for the new iPhone. As soon as the iPhone store opened up, they were there ready to purchase the phone. They were the early adopters, where the early majority were the people who would wait the second weekend to buy the iPhone when the lines died down. Yeah, I'm going to get it, but I'm going to wait until the lines die down. And I'm going to let other people maybe work out some of the kinks, if you will. And if I have a question, I know I have an outlet that I can, hey, I know you got this iPhone 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'm having a hard time with the settings here. Can you help me out? I saw it the same way. And then eventually you get the late majority who they might be the people who buy the iPhone 13 when the iPhone 14 comes out, right? Because they're looking to save money or for whatever reason.
Right.
And then you absolutely have the late adopters who quite honestly have to buy the new iPhone because they don't make the type of version of flip phone that they still might have. And then that's where
that's my
change.
Dad.
Okay. Shout out to Melissa's dad. And so when you have change, you're going to have some professionals who might cling to an instructional practice, approach, a belief, because this is the way we've always done it, or I saw success in this regard because back in 5 or 10 years ago, we were doing some really great things. And we accept that and we appreciate that. Moving forward, here's the expectation. So those late adopters who absolutely just need to be told what to do at times, and that's just part of leadership. You have to understand that. You provide that level of support, coaching, grace for weeks, months at a time. But it gets to a point, and you have to know this as a leader, that the clear expectation has to be provided and move forward with so that there's no ambiguity, there's no cracks in the foundation. It's not perfect. It might be slightly uncomfortable at times. And I had some of those conversations where I had to be very clear with my expectation as a building principal. And when I came in to visit your classroom, Lori, this is what I expect to see. but that's the responsibility I had with myself. And I slept okay at night knowing that I was doing this because it was in the best interest of children, not because it was a power play as a leader.
I think before we wrap up, Lori, just one last question for Ernie is there anything else that you learned on your leadership journey that you want to share with everybody? Any things that stuck out along the way?
Yeah. You're always evolving, always. So when I first learned about the science of reading, and as we were first going about implementing the science of reading, and identifying resources to really support what was missing, and then you feel good, like, oh yeah, this is okay, we're set. You're never really set. You're always evolving, and be okay with having to be nimble and pivot and change when you need to. This is the way we have to do it with regards to a particular instructional practice. Be open. I will tell you, I was very rigid with doing phonemic awareness without letters. I'm just being super transparent. And then as I began to understand more of the research and literature, and speaking with who I consider to be mentors in this literacy space, and understanding, okay, so we want to use letters with phonemic awareness as soon as possible, make that connection. Okay. And so having that conversation with my teachers, I didn't come in and say, this is what we got to do. Again, don't do that. Have those conversations with your teachers and say, hey, here's what the national conversation is about, and here's what we perhaps should consider. What are your thoughts? And you'll see they might have similar thoughts and have similar feelings. And it's like, okay. And they'll help create that level of change even more organically than you could as a leader when you're just giving a directive. And so that, be open to the idea that you're always going to be evolving. And assessment for me was huge. Understanding your assessments, leveraging the data in a way that's going to impact and improve instruction. I understood that concept when I started as a building principal, but I absolutely had a thorough understanding it towards the last 4 years of my time of 8 years of building leadership. I understood that we wanted to use data to inform instruction, but I really didn't understand what that looked like. But you have to understand your assessments. You have to understand what they measure, and then how you can use that to inform instruction, particularly during the MTSS process, and why we progress monitor, and why we can't be set for months at a time with a particular intervention. We have to always be constantly looking to see if it's working, and then we have to adjust. That understanding really helped me lead our building, our MTSS process. My tag team partner, our assistant principal, Mike Van Buren, who I thoroughly enjoyed working with, as we grew together as a leadership team, and as we grew together in our knowledge, that helped us be better leaders in the MTSS process, because everyone knows we are in that process as admin, right, as leaders. And so we were not passive in that role. We didn't just sit there, nod, and shake our heads. We were engaged, and you have to really maximize that system. You can't just talk about it; you got to be about it. And so those are my two pieces of advice. Be okay with always evolving. Don't be rigid with a specific approach, even if it does align with what some people would call alignment with the science of reading. And also understand your assessments, what they measure, and how it impacts your instruction.
Well, I know that we are coming to a close, and we have a couple rapid fire questions.
All right.
You ready for them?
I'm ready.
All right, Melissa, go ahead.
All right. What do you love to read?
What do I love to read? Oh, goodness. Well, okay. Besides the obvious sports, which I do love to read, I am immensely interested in the overlap between equity and literacy.
What do you love to watch?
Oh, gosh. So
besides sports,
I started. No, for sure. But I never watched Game of Thrones, and when it initially came out, but then the newest version, the prequel, came out, and then I had to binge watch the Game of Thrones, and I'm like so into that type of era, not era, that type of era of like the medieval times or whatever. And so like I'm watching Valhalla on Netflix. I'm watching with not the Whisperer, something with Henry Cavill on Netflix, The Witcher. Oh man,
Witcher.
it's such like yeah, it's so cool.
Do you
I
find
really
yourself
appreciate
like talking in that time period?
To my kids, sometimes yes.
I asked because when I like binge watched Ted Lasso, I was like, and suddenly we're all talking with British accents, you know?
Oh yeah, yep.
All right, what do you love to listen to?
Oh, I love to listen to music from when I was in high school and college. So 90s hip hop, R&B, early 2000s hip hop, R&B. That is what is absolutely on my Apple Music playlist. And my kids have a thorough understanding of the performance of the performers of those era. They know who Jay-Z is. They know who, well, they probably already knew who Beyonce is, but you know, like people
I should
that,
hope so.
yeah, right. But, you know, others that are from that era that probably they wouldn't really know now. They know because of my music, that I listen to.
I love that. Same here. All right. Final question. Why do you do what you love for literacy or for education?
I do it for the students. Absolutely. I do it for the students. And because I hold that responsibility as a leader very seriously with regards to that instructional leadership. And sometimes the managerial piece can be so overwhelming as a building leader or as a district leader. But our instructional leadership role is very important. You know, when you go into an interview, that's what they're going to be asking you most times is how are you going to be that instructional leader? They're not going to ask you about fire drills and they're not going to ask you about the lunch schedule, which those are very important things. And they have to be in place so that safety is of the utmost importance. But that instructional leadership is so big and so important. And ensuring that these children know how to read. If you can't read, you're eliminating a quarter of the math test. You're absolutely eliminating a lot of the science and social studies learning you're going to do because that's ostensibly is all reading and writing. And so with that, you have to be literate and have that level of confidence in you because if you don't have that level of literacy, then it does impact your perception of yourself, perhaps, and others' perception of you. And so it's just really important to start and get it right at the earliest age as possible. And regardless of where they're coming from, when they enter our school, it is our responsibility to help them learn how to read and how to write and be successful in literacy.
100%. That's why we're here too. We're so glad that you joined us today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for talking with us. Yeah,
I would say for our listeners, if you're a teacher and you have a leader that should hear these messages, definitely share with your leaders that need to hear some of these. I think it's a nice, gentle way of saying, hey, I have a podcast that would be great for you to hear from. So definitely share it with leaders.
Yeah. And Melissa and Lori, I'll also add, reach out to me. I have met with people at 6, 7 in the evening. And because quite honestly, during the school day is crazy. I get it. We're working with the kids and we're doing our thing. I've met with people on the weekends, 30 to 60 minutes at a time and there's no charge for that. It's like when the researchers met with me, we're colleagues, we're professionals. And these are just meetings to really, to work together and just pick each other's brains. So please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that offer. And we are so glad that you talked with us. Thank you for saying yes to this conversation. And thank you for energetically sharing all of your knowledge. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Melissa and Laura, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for all you're doing. Thanks for listening, literacy lovers. To stay connected with us, sign up for our email list at literacypodcast.com.
And to keep learning together, join the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast Facebook group. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter.
If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to share with a teacher friend or leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Just a quick reminder that the views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast are not necessarily the opinions of Great Minds PBC or its employees.
We appreciate you so much, and we're so glad you're here to learn with us.